Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. Today, we're heading to the most desolate place on Earth, the South Pole, on December 14, 1911. That's the day Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen and 4 companions became the first humans to reach the South Pole, winning what the press called the race to the pole against British explorer Robert Falcon Scott. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. Amundsen succeeded not because he was braver or tougher than Scott, but because he was more methodical, more willing to learn from indigenous peoples, and more focused on survival than glory. Understanding why Amundsen won and Scott died teaches us something crucial about preparation versus improvisation, about learning from those who know, and about the difference between achieving goals and surviving them. Picture this. It's December 14th, 1911, in Antarctica. After 2 months of brutal travel across ice and snow, Roald Amundsen and 4 Norwegian companions, Olav Bjaaland, Helmer Hansen, Sverre Hassel, and Oscar Wisting, are standing at what their instruments tell them is 90 degrees south latitude. The South Pole, the bottom of the world, a place no human has ever stood before. They plant the Norwegian flag, they take photographs, they leave a tent with a letter for Scott, asking him to deliver it to the King of Norway in case Amundsen's team doesn't return. Then they turn around and begin the 800-mile journey back to their base camp. 34 days later, they arrive safely at their base. They've traveled 1,600 miles on skis, using dog sleds in some of the harshest conditions on Earth, and they've lost not a single man. Meanwhile, Robert Falcon Scott and his British team are still struggling toward the pole. They'll reach it 5 weeks after Amundsen, on January 17, 1912. They'll find Amundsen's tent and Norwegian flag waiting for him, and on the brutal journey back, exhausted, starving, and frozen, all 5 men will die, just 11 miles from a supply depot that could have saved them. Here's the thing that I always wonder about. When Amundsen stood at the South Pole on December 14th, did he think about Scott? Did he feel triumph, or did he feel the weight of what this competition was costing? Because this wasn't just about being first, it was about survival. And only one team understood that. Let me build the clock for you, because understanding why Amundsen succeeded where Scott failed reveals something important about how preparation, methodology, and willingness to learn from others determine outcomes when there's no margin for error. Think about it this way. Both expeditions had the same goal, to reach the South Pole first. Both faced the same brutal environment. Temperatures dropping to minus 40 degrees, blizzards, crevasses, the blinding white emptiness of Antarctica. Experienced explorers led both, but their approaches were fundamentally different. Here's what the evidence tells us. Amundsen prepared obsessively. He studied every Arctic and Antarctic expedition that had come before. He learned from the Inuit people of Greenland, spending time understanding how they survived in extreme cold. He learned to use dog sleds efficiently. He knew their clothing techniques, fur instead of wool, loose garments instead of tight, multiple layers that could be adjusted. Scott, by contrast, relied on British methods. He initially used ponies for transport, despite evidence that they wouldn't survive Antarctic conditions. He used motorized sledges that broke down. He planned to have his men haul sledges themselves for much of the journey. Manhauling, they called it, seeing it as more noble than using dogs. His clothing was wool, which retained moisture and froze. Think about what this reveals. Amundsen approached polar exploration as a problem to be solved through learning and preparation. Scott approached it as a test of British character and endurance. One was about methodology, the other was about proving something. I find myself thinking about this because it shows up in every field. The person who succeeds isn't always the bravest or most determined. It's often the person who prepared best, who learned from those with experience, who focused on the goal rather than on proving something about themselves. Now here's where my investigator's training becomes crucial. Because when you look at the evidence, at the journals, the equipment choices, the route planning, you see the differences compound. Amundsen's base camp was closer to the pole. He'd chosen better. His route avoided the dangerous Beardmore Glacier that Scott had to climb. His team was smaller, 5 men instead of Scott's larger party, making logistics simpler. His food depots were more frequent and better stocked. His dogs were trained and cared for systematically. Every decision was made to maximize the chance of success and survival. Scott made different choices. His base camp was further from the pole. His route was more difficult. His larger party created tension over who would make the final push to the pole. He didn't decide until they were already in Antarctica, which created resentment. His food depots were too far apart, and critically, his fuel cans leaked during storage, leaving him with less fuel to melt snow for water on the return journey. Think about the position Scott's team was in on their return. They were exhausted from manhauling. They were underfed because Scott had miscalculated their calorie needs. They were demoralized from arriving at the pole second. They were freezing because they lacked adequate fuel. And they were dying, one by one, until the last 3 men, Scott, Edward Wilson, and Henry Bowers, died in their tent just 11 miles from the supplies that could have saved them. Scott's final journal entry is heartbreaking. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. Here's what troubles me about this story. Scott's expedition is often portrayed as a noble tragedy, brave men dying in pursuit of glory. And they were fearless. They did suffer terribly, but they died because of the choices their leader made, choices that prioritized appearance over survival, tradition over learning, and proving British superiority over doing what actually worked. We're still making versions of those same choices today, and I think this is where the story gets especially relevant for us right now. Look at how we approach complex challenges. Do we study what works, learn from those with experience, and prepare methodically as Amundsen did? Or do we rely on tradition, prove we're tough enough, and hope determination carries us through like Scott? Here's what fascinates me. The pattern shows up everywhere, in business, in sports, in education, in personal challenges. The Amundsen approach, methodical preparation, learning from experts, focusing on the goal, usually wins. The Scott approach, relying on toughness and tradition, often fails, sometimes catastrophically. Think about it. Amundsen learned from the Inuit, from indigenous peoples who'd lived in extreme cold for generations. He set aside European pride and admitted they knew more about survival in harsh conditions than he did. That humility, that willingness to learn from others was crucial to his success. Scott didn't do that. He relied on British naval traditions, on what had worked in temperate climates, on what seemed proper and noble to European thinking. He didn't learn from indigenous peoples. He didn't adapt to Antarctic conditions. He brought his assumptions with him and paid the price. The pattern repeats in modern exploration, in disaster response, in emergency management. The experts who succeed are those who learn from local knowledge, who adapt to conditions rather than imposing their assumptions, who focus on survival rather than on maintaining appearances. Here's what troubles me. We often celebrate the Scott approach more than the Amundsen approach. We make martyrs of those who die trying. We admire determination and grit, and those qualities matter, but not as much as preparation, methodology, and willingness to learn from others. I find myself thinking about this in my own work. As someone who worked in criminal investigation, I learned that solving cases required learning from experienced colleagues, adapting methods to circumstances, and focusing on results rather than proving I was tough or smart enough. The investigators who succeeded weren't always the most determined. They were the most systematic. Think about the position we put people in when we glorify sacrifice over success. We tell them that dying in pursuit of a goal is somehow more noble than achieving it and surviving. Scott's team became heroes in Britain. They have statues and memorials. Amundsen, who actually succeeded and brought his team home alive, is less celebrated. What kind of incentive structure is that? We should celebrate the person who achieved the goal and kept everyone alive, not the person who died trying. So as we think about that December day in 1911, when Amundsen and his team stood at the South Pole, I think the question for us isn't about who deserved to win some imaginary race. The question is about what determines success when there's no margin for error, and whether we value the right things. I respect both expeditions' courage. Going to Antarctica in 1911 required extraordinary bravery, regardless of how well you prepared. But courage alone wasn't enough. Scott's team had courage. They died anyway. Here's what the investigator in me sees. Amundsen succeeded because he built the clock. He understood the mechanisms of polar survival, how to stay warm, travel efficiently, maintain morale, calculate food needs, and train and manage dogs. He didn't guess or improvise. He studied, learned, tested, and prepared. Scott failed because he relied on improvisation and British determination. He made key decisions without adequate knowledge. He dismissed indigenous expertise. He prioritized appearing noble over being effective. And when things went wrong, as they inevitably do in Antarctica, he had no margin for error. Think about what we owe to indigenous peoples in this story. The Inuit had developed, over centuries, methods for surviving in extreme cold. Amundsen recognized their expertise and learned from them. That knowledge, how to make clothing, how to use dog sleds, how to prevent frostbite, saved his life and his team's lives. Scott could have learned the same lessons. He chose not to. That choice cost him and his team their lives. I always come back to this principle. Respect every person for who they are and be willing to learn from those with knowledge and experience. Amundsen respected the Inuit enough to learn from them. Scott didn't. That difference, humility versus pride, mattered more than courage or determination. Here's what gives me hope. We can learn from this. When we face complex challenges, we can choose the Amundsen approach. Study what works, learn from those with experience, prepare methodically, focus on achieving the goal and surviving, not on proving something. We don't have to repeat Scott's mistakes. But here's what troubles me. We keep making Scott's choice. We rely on tradition instead of learning. We value toughness over preparation. We mistake suffering for achievement. And people die, sometimes literally, often metaphorically, when better approaches exist. The great philosopher George Santayana once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." And here's why that matters today. Amundsen's success teaches us that methodical preparation beats brave determination, that learning from indigenous and local expertise beats relying on tradition, that focusing on survival and success beats focusing on glory and proving something. Yet we keep celebrating the Scott approach, dying nobly in pursuit of goals, over the Amundsen approach, achieving goals and bringing everyone home alive. We keep dismissing indigenous knowledge in favor of Western methods, keep valuing toughness over preparation, and keep making martyrs of those who failed heroically while barely remembering those who succeeded systematically. If we cannot remember why Amundsen lived and Scott died, not because of courage or determination, but because of preparation, learning, and methodology, we're condemned to keep celebrating noble failures over systematic success, to keep dismissing expertise, to keep confusing suffering with achievement. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, think about whether you're preparing like Amundsen or improvising like Scott, whether you're willing to learn from those with expertise, even if it means setting aside pride, and whether you value achieving your goals and surviving them more than proving you were tough enough. Because that's what December 14th, 1911 teaches us, not just about polar exploration, but about the difference between achievement and martyrdom, between methodology and courage, between learning and pride. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.